I wanted to go over a couple things that are happening in California that I hope will resonate a bit with the fishermen on Kauai. I want to talk for just very briefly about the Monterey Bay Fisheries Trust as a community organization, and then talk about my work with the San Diego Fishermen's Working Group, of which Pete Helme is the president. And then last, I'll give a few sort of thoughts about, from my old harbormaster hat about working with harbors and how they can help you or hurt you. And so, to begin with, on the Monterey Bay Fisheries Trust, it began with a report that I wrote about 10 years ago that outlined the things that the City of Monterey needed to do to enhance and preserve its commercial fishing industry. And there was a lot of nuts and bolts, excuse me, in that, like ice machines. But one of the main things was you need to create a nonprofit organization that can really carry the water on helping fishermen in just a wide variety of ways. And so a 501c3 nonprofit was formed by a set of community leaders, and it has really been quite active and done a lot of good work in the community. Everything from advocating for regulation changes in the political arena to trying to secure grants for ice machines, to helping fishermen when they have to apply for disaster funding, to COVID grants. They produce a weekly bulletin called Buoy Bulletin that contains information about where you can buy local seafood, if it's off the boat sales, what restaurants are selling local, and even includes some kind of homey type fish recipes. And it also contains a lot of information for fishermen about the management process and what have you. So they're doing all these things. They recently also got some grants to produce meals through a Meals on Wheels program for senior citizen. And they produced around 50,000 meals over a year and a half, and that's still ongoing. So they're having a community impact. And my main message with talking about this is the need for some leadership and organizing so that you can get community-wide support for fishermen, for what they need and to advance them. So I want to move on now to the San Diego Fishermen's Working Group. It's another nonprofit organization. It's got a board of directors of 9 people plus alternates, and they represent the different gear types that fish. And so we're talking about swordfish and tunas and lobster and sea urchins and what have you. So all those different gear types are represented. And it again is to create a unified voice for fishermen in the region and other processes, state and federal processes. So that, on the adage that they need to stick together to have any power at all. And so my work with them began just mostly on kind of some real estate stuff that they were negotiating with the port and with the developer. But it really migrated into also trying to help them and work with them on some of the big questions confronting fishermen probably everywhere. The question of how do you get more value, from your labor, and how do you expand markets? I mean, just the question that every fisherman has. And also, the San Diego area suffers the same problem that almost every place does, that so much of the seafood products is being imported. Something like between 65 to 85% in our region is imported or aquaculture raised. And so it's displaced the demand for wild capture fish. Also, our Sea Grant did a study of the San Diego region and found that only 8% of the seafood restaurants sold locally caught seafood, and 8%. And there were others that maybe sold some, but also had a lot of other, like farm raised Atlantic salmon, those kind of products. And there were a lot of seafood restaurants, again, quote unquote, that sold no local products at all. It was all imported from other areas. And then also, continuing the landscape here, you've got the problem that a lot of areas have, that different environmental groups just are hammering endlessly on overfishing and other things that aren't necessarily true, or really not at all true in the US, but still it creates this impression in the public that they should avoid eating seafood. So, that's the background. And, with that for a long time, there's been little sporadic efforts to sell, to direct market seafood, off the boat sales. Pete very well described, 8 years ago, beginning the Dockside Market, which is a huge event in San Diego. Individual fishermen may have had their own markets and selling directly to certain restaurants and chefs that they had a relationship with, but this was all very low scale. A lot of the larger volume products were still going to buyers, and the buyers would then distribute with the markups that they need or want. And so that was the dynamic. And so when we talk about direct marketing, you have to really also be aware of this dance that exists between the fish buyers and fishermen. Where an enlightened buyer, and I use the word enlightened in my opinion, they're going to recognize that fishermen need to stay in business. And so if they have to sell some products direct to get more value out of it, that's still good for them because the fishermen's still fishing and they're still going to get some products. A less enlightened, again, my opinion, buyer is going to say, basically, heck with you, you're going to compete with me. I'm not buying any of your products. I either buy it all or I buy none. And so, and then that also sets up the dynamic where the fisherman who, maybe goes to a market or farmer's market or whatever, and then, needs to sell the rest of his volume to somebody. And so the buyer can say, go away, I'm not going to do that. So anyway, those are issues, relationship issues that need to be worked out. So then we have the pandemic coming. And so that just really, messed everything up. And the big buyers weren't buying for sure because they couldn't sell to restaurants. The restaurants weren't buying from individual fishermen because they were closing. And it was really a world of hurt at the beginning stages. And then, of course, another background is the economic blows that happened to the whole, community about, basically the problem of the food insecure was just magnified by the pandemic. And so out of that, the fishermen kind of got together and how can we get some good out of the situation? And so came up with the idea of creating a grant request to the San Diego Community Foundation. And so it was going to fund a program that we called Fish to Families. And this program was really multifaceted as we pitched it to them. It was going to, number one, keep people fishing, create a new market for them, especially for high volume and or underutilized species, which might also be lower value species that made, providing these meals to the food insecure more realistic. Also, a goal was establishing a partnership with local kitchens using our seafood as the protein source. So new relationships there with kitchens. Another goal, maybe surprisingly, but to train chefs on how to break down whole fish and how to get really the maximum meat and nourishment out of each individual fish. Extend the meals provided through the program because of this for things like creating soups out of the bones and other stock, heads, and what have you, at the end of it. So we got about 20% more meals out of this program just because the chefs were able to do that. And then another goal, just a general one, establish just more and broader community relationships, starting out with a new relationship with the foundation, but also relationship with the kitchen and a variety of chefs, relationship with the different food distribution programs, had the admiration of the large San Diego Port Commission for the project. And so it was really a winner in terms of establishing new relationships and putting local seafood really out front as a positive thing. And then lastly, educate chefs and hopefully then their wait staff on the sustainability of U.S. caught and locally caught seafood. And we had a partnership there with California Sea Grant and also NOAA Fisheries, their education arm, provided some written materials on that. And so, part of this ended up being a very, very positive relationship with an entity called Open Gym, very capable group that could do all these things and print out complete meals, basically for around, I think it ended up being around $4 a meal, although they were free to the public. That's just what our costs were. And we put out 42,000 meals in a little less than a year. And so, again, all those goals were met. New markets helped out Fisherman. It wasn't really a high volume thing, but still it helped some key people. And so this also then led to further thinking about developing other direct marketing strategies. And in terms of responding to the pandemic, things like increased off the boat sales occurred. There's one fisherman who actually, through a website, began delivering products. Another, use of, this is actually not from San Diego, but from Central California, where one fisherman I know uses his onboard computer and a listserv he's developed. And so he's a salmon fisherman. If he comes in with 60 fish, he sends out a message when he's a couple of hours out to this whole big list. I've got 60 fish, $10 a pound. I'll be at this dock at this time. And he sells them all, very, very easily. So all those kind of strategies and techniques were being developed. Another really large effort that's underway now is to create a fish house. Could also be called a fish hub, but it would be a place for cold storage and some limited gear storage, perhaps ice production, and limited fish processing if we can get the health department clearances. And so the key thing with the fish hub or fish house is that it allows fishermen to extend the life of their products in a high quality setting. And so when they can have that, then they can hopefully smooth out the glut market problem, and just generally be able to manage their sales a lot better if they're in control of when those sales occur. And so we're in the early stages of that. We've created a business plan. We're looking for money. We have a building site available. So we've made some progress, but it hasn't really, quite come together yet. Also at this very time, we have just, in a partnership with another entity, put in a USDA grant request for a 2.5-year marketing program to market local seafood to the general public. And that means hiring somebody for 2.5 years who's devoted to using all the media sources, including social media, to get local seafood out in front of the public. And so, we're hoping that really stimulates everything. Another little sidebar thing is to, in the early stages also of developing a festival, probably something like a yearly festival that would be titled some version of local seafood, global flavor. And we put it that way because San Diego is an area with very diverse community, different immigrant populations, and what have you. And so, these populations all have different ways of preparing seafood. And so we think that that's going to be a really big, really big event, well attended, what have you. There'll be a lot of interest in that. So those are kind of what's happening. The challenges are, a lot of them are centered around, how do you extend the life of your product, and those really go to, how you're handling your product on board, what have you. Is there ice? Is there onboard refrigeration? Is there continuing ice, not just on board, but some kind of a cold storage thing that you can extend that. A really big one is one that Pete already touched on with the Dockside Market is the whole fish versus fillet thing. You've got a vast market in a tourist destination like Hawaii in tourists, but they can't manage a 20-pound tuna. And so, they need to walk away with a bag of fillets that they can take home to their barbecue or whatever. And so, recommendation is, is to try to establish relationships with existing kitchens, that's existing restaurants and what have you, whether those kitchens can be used after hours, rented or that kind of thing. But to somehow get past, the problem of the whole fish. And even local people, I imagine, a fair number of local people don't really want to deal with the whole fish for different reasons. So that's a really key thing to solve. Then also little things like really trying to work with the individual restaurants to feature your local fishermen on their chalkboards or their menus. This fish is caught by this vessel, by this fisherman, that kind of thing. And easy to do on a chalkboard. You don't have the same product every day, perhaps, but you erase it and you start something else. And so, those can really, generate the community relationships between your fishermen and the public that you really need to develop. There's other thoughts, like, and I think tuna would be really good for this, is, the smoke products, another way of extending the life of the product. And, there's some health requirements for that also, but it's doable. And then also working with your buyers, whoever they are, on value-added meal packaging. It's not just the fish fillet, but it's also the yam or the bell pepper or whatever, the several different other products in the same package that you walk away with. I don't know to what extent you have that in Kauai already, but that's something that's gaining in popularity here in California. So with that, I want to just maybe give a few thoughts about harbor management and that kind of thing. And Molly, shut me up if I'm going over here. So, I did work over a 42-year period on the waterfront in Santa Cruz and Monterey. And they were both government-owned harbors. And so there was this government relationship that I had with, my employer. In both those cases, the harbor management, meaning me, and also the city council or elected commission, came to appreciate the value of commercial fishermen as a key client. And not just because they pay berth rent and maybe they pay wharfage also, I don't know if you have that, but more for the fact that they're bringing in these local fresh products that directly enhance the oftentimes larger tourism-based economies of the area. And so there's a lot of reasons, and also, of course, cultural reasons, a lot of reasons why harbor management really, ought to be listening to the needs of fishermen and helping them out and what have you. I certainly know that's not the case everywhere. And of course, you also may have private owners of the marinas and what have you, who may have an entirely different view of it. But whichever way it is, it's important that fishermen, again, create some organization, have some sense of leadership, and work together to impress their value on that management, whether it's private or public. And this also goes for the larger governmental entities like your county, to impress on your county about your economic role and everything. And you should be really out there with the county asking for help for things like, don't you have a grant writer? Don't you have somebody who can investigate grant opportunities for us and then prepare those grants? That would be a real natural thing, I think, a natural ask, for fishermen to make of their local government. So I think I'm pretty much done with that. Maybe the last thing is that, fishermen really everywhere have natural partners, natural partners in the tourism industry, natural partners in food banks, in cultural centers, what have you. And that, your leadership in your community needs to really, apply some glue to those things and really, start having them all view, fishing as very much a part of those other activities.